Thank you very much. Beautiful venue. If Prague has been always in my heart. I've been to a couple of conferences before, and yeah, very, very happy to be here. So we are going to be talking about, mapping the dependencies of publicly funded open source, a stress test for Ethereum Rails. As I already mentioned, my name is Sofia. I work for a funding coordination team at the Ethereum Foundation. And as I already mentioned as well, we are the researchers working on improving funding mechanisms within Ethereum, inside Ethereum, and beyond. So for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to go with you through the piece of the research. There's going to be some numbers that would give you a second thought on the state of open source funding, how open source has been funded so far in the EU, and why Ethereum is the right piece of critical infrastructure to fix what's broken. So I know that some of you might want to go to Vitalik's talk later on because it's right after my talk. That's why I decided to swap the end of the presentation and put it in the beginning. So I'll start with the hypothesis, with the research that I'm doing. So the hypothesis that I'm working on, that I have to prove or disprove, is that a dependency-aware stack built on infrastructure designed for transparency, programmability, and intermediary minimization would provide a fairer, more efficient funding environment than anything that exists today. So we'll start with numbers, as I promised, and I hope that they will, as I said, give you a second thought on how does it look like in open source, not in the blockchain space, but open source in general. So the supply side value, it's essentially what it actually costs to build and maintain open source, is at $4.15 billion. That's according to 2024 Harvard and University of Toronto working paper. The authors are mentioned here, the name as well. So, and the demand side value, what it would cost the world to replace it, is at $8.8 trillion. So spend $1, save 2,000. There's not many infrastructure investments that come so close. Another interesting piece of information that I wanted to take from this working paper is that 96% of that 8.8 trillion demand side value is created by only 5% of open source software developers. And according to the articles that took a review of this working paper, we are landing at about 3,000 people. 3,000 people holding up the foundation under banking, browsers, medical devices, government services. It's crazy. Are they getting paid, actually? And then I decided to take a look at another paper. It's an open source software funding survey that was done in 2024 by Linux Foundation, GitHub, and Harvard. They interviewed 501 companies, and out of them, 159 came to them and said, yes, we do fund open source financially, and they reported that they funded it on $1.7 billion. Yeah, looks good, right? And the sum is good, but if we split it, if we see actually what's inside, we will see that those organizations that responded to the survey, 86 of them, they contributed to open source and employee labor. So basically, companies letting their engineers spend paid hours on open source. It's not bad. I mean, Google developer is, for example, contributing to an indie solo maintainer project, and this maintainer would never be able to afford this kind of force, that kind of power. So the problem with that is that the labor flows towards the project companies already depend on. So if, for example, Google is dependent on, I don't know, 5 projects, they would just contribute to those 5 and nothing more. And then the second problem is that the long tail underneath, the dependencies, they typically get nothing. Only the top level project is getting this, this engineering power. So only 14%, about 239 million of that 1.7 billion is a direct financial support. Now let's look at this number. If we look at $9 million, we will see that before maintainers pay themselves, they would have to spend on contractors, they would have to spend on project ops, they have to spend on legal, they have to spend on audits and whatnot. And then these are all the bills that maintainer pays before paying themselves. So 4%, it is roughly $9.7 million that reaches maintainers' pockets. So here is the overview of all the numbers that I gave you. And 8.8 trillion of demand-side value, and we are only paying 9.6 million to maintainers. And now let's divide 9.6 million to maintainers to 3,000 people that I mentioned before, and we end up paying $3,200 per maintainer per year. I'm not going to comment that. So, organizations contribute the way they contribute. They have engineers, they give engineering powers. So if we want to get more direct money to maintainers, how we actually do that? The answer is governments. Governments have budgets, grants, procurement contracts, financial tools that can reach the maintainers corporate labor consistently misses. Since we are in Europe, I decided to give you an overview of the EU programs. How does the EU support open source? And we actually find out that it's not too bad. So I'll start with NLNet. It's a Dutch foundation. It gave birth to modern direct-to-developer grant-making in Europe through the early internet protocols they supported. And they're also a lead coordinator of the Next Generation Internet Initiative. And over the course of 2019 to 2024, they provided support to 80,000 active contributors. That was 140 million euros, and it was 1,200 plus projects that they supported. In Germany, there is a sovereign tech agency. This is a very interesting one because this fund is built explicitly for open digital-based technologies, which means that they support libraries, protocols, and dev tools that align below the application layer, so the dependencies, so to say. You don't have to be German, you don't have to be based in Germany, you don't have to be even based in the EU to be able to apply for this fund. And since 2022, since it started, they redistributed already around 25 million euros, and they helped 60 plus projects. Another interesting case, and that happened just now, is that the idea of sovereign tech agency is being brought to the EU level. 1 month ago, EDIC, European Digital Infrastructure Consortium, announced that they would like to launch a pilot, basically a support of all those, as I mentioned, libraries, protocols, and whatnot is lying under the application layer, below the application layer, that would be supported on the EU level. And another number to remember is roughly 100 billion euros. That is 2 umbrella programs, Horizon Europe and Digital Europe, and obviously open source software projects are qualifying and are very much welcome to apply to those calls. So why am I telling you all of this? Because there is a very interesting shift that is happening in the EU law right now, and it's called Cyber Resilience Act. And it might change, it's created for security and vulnerability, providing better security and vulnerability for digital sovereignty in Europe, but we think that it might change the funding redistribution mechanism. So I'll tell a little bit about Cyber Resilience Act. My colleague Devansh was already talking about it before in one sentence, but there's basically 2 phases of this act. September 2026 is partially when it comes to force. December 2027 is when it fully comes into force. If you have non-commercial activity, so if you're just open source maintainers and you accept donations, if you're a public good, then CRA is not going to touch you. However, if you do any commercial activity in the EU market, even if you yourself are not coming from the EU, then you're probably a manufacturer. Here I've created a QR code. So I was at a conference 2-3 weeks ago in Brussels, and they were giving away those leaflets with links. This is the legal act and also all the FAQ sections, identifying the components, find out more. So basically all the documentation that you might want to read about Cyber Resilience Act, this is all here. I digitized this page for you, so please feel free to scan it. However, what is important here is that what's new? The change that is going to happen is called SBOM, or Software Bill of Materials, or in other words, the dependency graph, which is created to find security and vulnerability problems and report on them fast enough so that digital products that are being sold in the EU are, as I said, secure. However, from the funding perspective, When a funder opens up the project they are supporting, they no longer just see the top-level one. They see also the dependencies that are as crucial as the project they are planning to fund. So it will be very hard to claim that they didn't see them. So if the funders keep backing only the brand name projects on top while ignoring the deep roots underneath, the maintainers holding those roots up stay unsupported. And I'm going to show you a little demo that I built for the purpose of this conference, but I'm going to probably open source it later as well. So we are taking a very specific example here, a funder whose name is Schleswig-Holstein. It's the state a federal state in the northern Germany, and they have a so-called open innovation program. It's created so that they can fund open source software that is built from and for the state. So inside the state, paying their own grantees in Europe is not a problem because we have SEPA, it's free, it settles in second, but that's about the top-level project. What about their dependencies? And the tool that I built is essentially analyzing the 10 projects that they invested money into in 2024. They also have projects for 2025, which is going to be the next step of building the tool before I outsource it. So for now, it's on localhost, but that's how it looks like. And we can see 18 is the wrong number. Claude didn't change it, unfortunately, but it's 10 for now. So we see that there is roughly 4,000 libraries that those 10 projects that are built in Schleswig-Holstein by Schleswig-Holstein maintainers, 4,000 libraries that they're dependent on. These are the projects here. And for example, let's open up Foodsoft. Foodsoft is a software to support regional agricultural producers. Here it is. And we can see that of the 86 direct dependencies, 55 I primarily maintained outside of the EU or EFTA or UK region. We can see where direct dependencies are coming from. So the first top 3 libraries are actually coming, the maintainers of those libraries are coming from the US, Canada, and Japan. And if we want to fund all the dependencies of this project, we would need to fund across 6 continents in 12 different currencies. Let's go, for example, to the Quick Keep project. This is a project for quality management of childcare centers. Here we can see the same picture, and that more than half of the direct dependencies are maintained outside of the EU region, while the biggest amount of libraries that they're dependent on are coming from Germany, and then we can see top 2, top 3, top 4 are the US, Singapore, and Ukraine. So picture yourself now as a public funder, in our case, Schleswig-Holstein. You want to do the right thing. You would want to fund the project and its dependencies because now CRA gives you that visibility. And to fund those dependencies, it's not going to be just one SEPA transfer anymore. If we go to the overview, we will see here, geography, that only the cohort of 2024, for that, we need to fund 6 continents and we need to direct money in 33 currencies. So what can funder actually do? And there's 2 paths. Path A is to push redistribution down to the top-level maintainer. Maintainer is not going to do that. They are already buried in the workload, AI slope. They're burned out. So the financial coordination, it's like a second job for them, and they just don't have time for that, even if they want to play fair. Path B is to route it through a consultancy-style intermediary. Probably it's even worse because we are sending public funds that meant to be for open source through actors with no open source mandate of their own. And that's the catch-22 that I'm talking about on this slide. Catch-22 is any impossible situation caused by conflicting rules or systemic failure. So in our case, the CRA puts the dependency tree as the mandatory one in front of the funder. The funder may even want to support what they see, but the financial system that would have to bring money through currencies, jurisdictions, and borders is not built for it. So, can we make it cheaper? so that the fees are closer to 0 rather than 5, 8, 10%? Can we make it faster, moving at the speed of the internet, not at the speed of banking holidays and clearing cycles? Can we make it fairer so that not only the maintainer gets all the pie, and also not the maintainer who is the one who is shouldering the costs of redistribution? We believe we can, and we think we can do it with Ethereum. So coming back to the research hypothesis, basically, what I see is that if we use dependency graph, and we are going to have it on a mandatory level within the EU, and we use properties of Ethereum such as transparency, programmability, and intermediary minimization, we would achieve fair conditions for open source funding. So, what is the current progress where I am now? Do I talk to governments, or I'm just doing my research in a little room and do not talk to anyone? I do talk to governments. I do talk to so-called open source program offices. So those are typically open source enablers, strategists. So basically they try to introduce more open source solutions in their countries. And I started in the EU because we have a very strong digital sovereignty mandate here, and also another reason is because the EU has the most advanced and developed network of open source program offices, so it was meant to be that I would start from here. We think that decentralized infrastructure, decentralized piece of infrastructure such as Ethereum, that doesn't belong to any single player, is a natural fit for sovereignty, and that's why we are coming with that sort of hypothesis. However, general feedback is positive. The countries are open for conversation. They are very much interested in the ideas. However, we found a couple of blockers, such as there is a bigger problem that exists, that not enough actors fund open source. While open source program offices do exist in certain states, in certain governments, in certain cities, the major problem is that they do not fund open source yet, but we believe it's just a matter of time, considering how strong, as I mentioned already, the mandate of digital sovereignty is in the territory of the EU. And the second blocker is that current financial infrastructure doesn't allow us to send public money fully on chain from a government to a maintainer and further on to dependencies. But that's something that I know many DeFi, TradFi, stablecoin rails are working on at the moment. So while governments are not quite here yet, why not try to experiment with government-backed agencies? And there is a pilot already that runs on Ethereum rails, which I would like to cover in my presentation. So I'll create a QR code here if you want to read the announcement of UNICEF. But essentially, UNICEF is exploring sustainable funding for digital open goods, public goods, and they're using blockchain for that. UNICEF is the only part of the UN family that can receive donations and make investments using digital assets. And they're using DRIPS network on Ethereum in the pilot focused on the new sustainable funding solutions for digital public goods. They curated 5 digital public goods, set splits, and let the smart contract handle distribution. When a donor sends value to the address, it forwards it to 5 projects automatically. And I can even show you how it works, because the drip list is just here. So basically, whenever you send funds to this address, you can see how it all automatically splits to 20% each. It is set up specifically on purpose that it would go evenly to all 5 projects. However, DRIP supports dependency-aware splitting down the tree. So basically, you can weight the project deeper in the stack proportionally to how critical they are. And yeah, that already confirms that Ethereum rails together with dependency graph can actually work. So that's the research that I'm doing. To wrap up, please connect with me if you have heard your country is doing something about open source strategy. If you have connections to your open source program offices in your countries, that would be even better. I would really appreciate that. But if you've just heard that in the news, please connect with me. I would really love to hear from you. Also, if you work on stablecoin rails, you talk to national banks, I would love to hear updates on how is it going at the moment. If you're a builder placing digital products on the EU market, please read the Act. This is a side quest that I'm doing, trying to spread the Cyber Resilience Act awareness because I think it's quite important. And currently, I'm in the active interview phase of governments and governmental funds. So the first published results are going to be available at the UN Open Source Week at the end of June. So I assume I would be open it in public somewhere in July. And you will find all of the updates on my X, and you can also connect with me on Telegram. I have a slide for that. But before we finish, governments, if you can't stop us, collaborate with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A fellow meme enthusiast as well. It's very encouraging to see that. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions for Sofia? No? Anyone here from government? Oh, yes. You're not from government, but you've got a question. Yes.
The website you showed us, which splits the dependencies and kind of points to countries of each service, how would that look like if you were a product that used blockchain or a decentralized technology?
You mean how the dependency graph is going to be spread?
So this talks about currencies. Obviously, maybe you might depend on like crypto payments or rails, and then also if you're using a decentralized or distributed technology or service, then obviously you can't point it to one country, or can you? Yeah.
To one currency. Yeah, so basically I would assume that the governments would be interested in using euro-backed stablecoins in that sense. And then, there's basically a magic on chain is going to happen. So that's a part that I didn't come yet to. But I see that there is going to be stablecoin rails in order to redistribute the money. And as I said, I assume that we would start with euro-backed stablecoins because of euro and European Union. But if we are looking into redistributing the funds within the EU, however, I guess the answer would be stable coins, basically. Because that's the thing, when I interview governments, they always, whenever I talk to them about Ethereum, they always imagine Ethereum as a coin, not as a network. And they typically lack the knowledge about that we have stable coin infrastructure and that now it is possible not to send money in a volatile currency like Ethereum. So they're very pleased in the answer and they're like, oh, that actually sounds very interesting. No, I don't know the answer to that question, but I mentioned drips, so I assume they might have an answer to the question, so we can connect and I can connect you further to the providers of the infrastructure that is going to build this project.
Wonderful, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Right, yes, wonderful.
Hello. What seems to, is it government that seems to be the best, like the most promising source of funding? Because I guess there's like, what's the source of the funding primarily? And then there's, there's the distribution problem. Are you focused on both problems? And if you're focused on the sourcing, which is the most promising?
Sourcing as where money comes from for funding, right? That's because I can't hear you really well.
Sorry.
No worries. Yes, exactly. So I'm looking into, as I mentioned, there is a bigger problem where I can see open source is just underfunded, and that's something I'm trying to bring awareness with my topic as well on that regard. And I'm talking also to the governments that do not fund open source, and they might be that, for example, with my research coming to them, I'm too ahead of a curve, too early. However, they already kind of like keep that in mind. So whenever they would have an opportunity to fund open source, then they will be using our solution. So I work on kind of like the second step of the problem. That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. And great Space Invaders t-shirt, by the way. Big fan, yes. Thank you very much for all the questions. Round of applause for Sofia. Again, if you want to catch her around the venue, please do so. Thank you.